The crash of titanium against reinforced polymer echoed through the observation chamber like a death knell, and Dr. Calveth nearly shed her carapace plates in terror. Below in the demonstration arena, the human called Sterling simply laughed. Blood streamed from his split lip, where the climbing wall had rejected his advances with prejudice, painting crimson streaks across the artificial granite surface. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, and grinned up at the towering vertical face that had just tried to kill him. His dark eyes gleaming with something Calveth was beginning to recognize as anticipation rather than fear. The human's chest rose and fell in steady rhythms, his cardiovascular system processing the near-death experience with casual efficiency. His skin glistened with perspiration that would have been toxic fluid secretion in any rational species, yet he radiated contentment like warmth from a fusion core. Beside her, fellow anthropologist Mordane's probability sensors were clicking in rapid succession, the delicate instruments overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. His voice emerged as a strangled whisper through his respiratory vents. That creature just fell 40 vertical units. The impact force should have liquefied his internal organs. Calveth's mandibles twitched as she adjusted the recording apparatus with her secondary manipulator appendages. The human's bioreadings were transmitting normally through the monitoring patches they had convinced him to wear, though the data made no sense. His neural activity showed patterns consistent with pleasure rather than trauma, his endocrine system flooding with chemicals that registered as euphoric rather than distress-based. It defies every survival protocol we understand. Yet observe how he approaches the wall again. Sterling was indeed positioning himself at the base of the climbing surface, this time examining a route that appeared even more treacherous than his previous attempt. The handholds were smaller, the angles more severe, the potential for catastrophic failure exponentially higher. Any sane organism would have fled the area immediately after such a narrow escape from death. The human began to climb. His movements were fluid poetry written in controlled violence, each placement of hand and foot a calculated negotiation with gravity and momentum. Muscles engaged and released in sequences that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary pressure, his species having climbed their way out of primordial forests and into the stars through sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge reasonable limitations. Calveth found herself leaning forward despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain safe distance. The human's progress up the wall was mesmerizing in its apparent contradiction between grace and brutality. His breathing remained steady even as his body fought against forces that would crush most galactic species into paste. When he reached the summit 30 units above the floor, he paused. Then, to Calveth's absolute horror, he released his grip entirely. The fall lasted exactly 2.3 standard seconds. The human's body dropped through space with the inevitability of a collapsing star, yet somehow he managed to catch himself on a small protrusion just units from the floor. The arrest of his momentum sent shock waves through the wall structure that registered on their seismic equipment. Sterling hung there for a moment, grinning up at them through the observation window, then dropped the final distance to land in a controlled crouch that absorbed the impact with predatory ease. Mordane's sensory arrays were strobing in patterns Calveth had never seen before. His voice emerged as a barely audible frequency tremor. Query, was that intentional? The human below had moved to a different section of the arena, where arrays of projectile weapons were mounted on automated systems. Calveth's digestive tract clenched as she realized what was about to occur. Sterling positioned himself behind a barrier that would provide minimal protection from high-velocity impacts, then activated the weapons systems with casual indifference. The arena filled with the supersonic whine of accelerated metal as projectiles began painting the air around his position in lethal geometric patterns. The human moved. His body became liquid motion, flowing between trajectories of death with millisecond precision. Bullets traced glowing paths through the space where he had been instants before, their passage close enough to part his hair and tear fabric from his clothing. Yet he danced among them like they were gentle rainfall, his face illuminated by the strobing muzzle flashes with an expression of pure joy. When the firing sequence ended, Sterling stood untouched in the center of the arena, breathing hard but radiating satisfaction like a well-fed predator. Small smoking craters marked where the projectiles had impacted around him, creating a precise outline of human-shaped death that he had somehow avoided through reflexes that registered as superhuman on their instruments. Calveth's secondary nervous system was beginning to shut down from sensory overload. The human's bioreadings showed elevated heart rate and increased neural activity, but all within parameters that suggested vigorous exercise rather than mortal terror. His endocrine system was producing complex chemical cocktails that their database could only classify as pleasure responses. This cannot be normal recreational behavior for their species. Perhaps this individual is an aberrant example, mentally unstable or physiologically enhanced beyond baseline human parameters. Her hopeful hypothesis crumbled when Sterling activated the communications array and addressed them directly, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers with warm amusement. "Hey docs, this is pretty tame stuff for a Tuesday. You want to see something really fun?" Before either alien could formulate a response that adequately conveyed their terror, the human had moved to what appeared to be a launch platform. The device was clearly designed to accelerate objects to tremendous velocity using electromagnetic principles, though its purpose in a recreational context defied comprehension. Sterling strapped himself into a harness connected to the platform, his movements displaying the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual many times before. The targeting display showed a trajectory that would send him across the arena at speeds approaching those of atmospheric entry vehicles. Mordane's vocalizations had devolved into subsonic frequency distress, calls that their translation matrix couldn't parse. Calveth found herself pressing against the observation window, despite the structural warnings her suit was providing about proximity to the demonstration area. The electromagnetic launcher engaged with a sound like reality tearing. Sterling's body rocketed across the arena in a ballistic arc that would have reduced any reasonable organism to component molecules. The acceleration forces alone should have liquefied his brain tissue and collapsed his skeletal structure. Yet somehow he remained conscious and apparently functional throughout the trajectory. His landing zone was a series of suspended platforms connected by what appeared to be deliberately inadequate safety barriers. The first impact sent him bouncing between surfaces in a chaotic sequence that defied calculation, each collision threatening to break bones or rupture organs. Yet the human controlled every moment of his ricocheting journey across the obstacle course, using momentum and reflexes to navigate between surfaces with balletic precision. When he finally came to rest on the final platform, hanging upside down by one ankle over a pit that descended beyond their sensor range, he was laughing. The sound of human laughter echoing through the arena struck Calveth like a physical blow. It was rich and warm and utterly genuine, the vocalization of a creature experiencing profound satisfaction, rather than relief at surviving unsurvivable circumstances. Sterling righted himself on the platform and called up to them again, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance and his inverted position moments before. "That's what we call parkour with a rocket boost. Gets the blood flowing, you know. Clears the head, builds character. My grandmother used to do this exact routine when she was my age." Mordane's entire carapace was now cycling through distress colors in rapid sequence. His probability sensors had given up entirely and were emitting the diagnostic tones that indicated complete system failure. His grandmother performed these activities at advanced age while reproductively mature. The implications were staggering. If this represented normal recreational behavior for humans across age demographics, their species was even more terrifyingly resilient than preliminary studies had suggested. Sterling had moved to yet another apparatus, this one appearing to involve suspended cables and gravitational acceleration. He attached himself to the highest anchor point with equipment that looked desperately inadequate for the forces involved, then positioned himself at the edge of what appeared to be a controlled fall of several hundred units. The human looked up at them through the observation window, his expression bright with enthusiasm. This next one's called bungee jumping. The trick is calculating the cord length so you stop falling just before you hit the ground. Too long and you become paced, too short and you don't get the full experience. It's all about finding that sweet spot between death and disappointment. Without further preamble, he stepped off the platform. The fall was magnificent and terrible, Sterling's body plummeting toward the arena floor with the inevitability of orbital mechanics. Wind resistance caught at his clothing and hair as he accelerated, transforming him into a human-shaped meteor burning through the artificial atmosphere. At the last possible instant, the cord reached its maximum extension and arrested his descent with forces that should have snapped his spine like crystalline fiber. The sudden deceleration sent him bouncing back upward in a series of diminishing oscillations, each rebound bringing him closer to equilibrium between gravitational and elastic forces. When he finally hung motionless at the bottom of the cord's arc, mere units above the arena floor, Sterling was grinning with the radiant joy of someone who had just cheated death through precision engineering and supreme confidence in their own physical resilience. Calveth realized that her respiratory systems had been operating in emergency mode for the past several cycles. Her body's autonomous functions, having decided that observing human recreational activities qualified as a survival situation, requiring enhanced oxygen processing. Mordain had gone completely still beside her, his sensory arrays dimmed to minimal function as his consciousness retreated into protective protocols. His voice emerged as barely audible frequencies. Query: how does their species maintain population stability if this represents normal leisure behavior? The human had released himself from the bungee apparatus and was walking toward what appeared to be a weapon's range, though the targets were moving in patterns that suggested they were designed to shoot back. Sterling selected what their database classified as a high-powered projectile weapon and began checking its various systems with the casual competence of someone intimately familiar with tools of destruction. Before beginning his next demonstration, he looked up at them again, his expression suddenly serious despite the blood still decorating his face from the climbing wall encounter. You know, docs, I should probably mention something. Back on Earth, all this stuff I'm showing you, we consider it pretty relaxing. Good for stress relief, building teamwork, that sort of thing. The really exciting activities require special permits and safety waivers. He paused, apparently considering how to phrase his next statement. What I mean is, this is what we do for fun on a quiet weekend. The recreational activities that get our adrenaline really flowing. Well, those might be a bit intense for academic observation. Don't want to give you folks nightmares or anything. The projectile targets began their motion sequence, weaving through the air in patterns designed to challenge even enhanced reflexes. Sterling raised his weapon with fluid precision and began firing, each shot placed with mathematical accuracy despite the target's evasive maneuvers. But what made Calveth's neural pathways freeze was not the human's marksmanship, though it was indeed superhuman in its precision. What stopped her cognitive processes entirely was the realization that this creature, this apex predator disguised as a researcher's subject, was holding back. He was showing them the safe version of human recreation, the gentle introduction to what his species considered entertainment, the basic-level activities that wouldn't traumatize visiting academics. When the shooting demonstration ended, Sterling set down his weapon and approached the observation window. His face was illuminated by the arena's harsh lighting, revealing features that somehow managed to combine warmth and predatory alertness in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His voice carried clearly through the communications array, warm with genuine friendliness despite the casual display of lethality they had just witnessed. So, what do you think? Ready to try some hands-on participation? I could start you off with something really gentle, maybe basic rock climbing or paintball. Work your way up to the good stuff gradually. Mordain's carapace plates were rattling against each other in frequencies that indicated complete systemic panic. Calveth found her own speech centers struggling to process the concept of participating in activities that had nearly caused her to shed her exoskeleton simply from observation. The human waited patiently for their response, his expression bright with enthusiasm for sharing his species' recreational traditions with academic colleagues. Blood continued to seep from his split lip, and his clothing bore tears from projectile near misses, yet he radiated contentment like a being who had just enjoyed a particularly satisfying meal. In the distance, Calveth could hear alarms beginning to sound, as their research station's automated systems detected the biometric distress signals from the observation chamber. Emergency medical protocols were activating, responding to what the computers interpreted as life-threatening trauma among the research staff. Sterling heard the alarms too and looked concerned for the first time since entering the arena. "Oh hey, you folks okay up there?" Sometimes people have strong reactions the first time they see human recreation. Totally normal response. The adrenaline rush can be pretty intense even as a spectator. He moved toward the arena exit, his gait displaying the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in their own physical capabilities, despite having just survived multiple encounters with death. "Tell you what, let me grab some medical supplies and we'll get you stabilized. Then maybe we can review some footage of extreme sports competitions from Earth. Really give you a sense of what we're capable of when we're really trying to have fun." The observation chamber door sealed as Sterling departed, leaving Calveth and Mordain alone with their shattered understanding of biological possibility. Their instruments continued recording, faithfully documenting the physiological evidence of their encounter with human recreational behavior. In the blessed silence that followed, Calveth finally found her voice. Recommendation: reclassify humans from Category 7 sentient species to Category 12 apex predators with recreational death-seeking behaviors. Mordain's response emerged as barely coherent frequency modulations. Secondary recommendation: immediate psychological evaluation for research staff. Extended exposure to human recreational activities may constitute occupational hazard requiring hazard pay adjustments. Through the observation window, the arena stood empty except for the scattered evidence of Sterling's demonstration. Climbing walls bore the scars of his passage, projectile impacts decorated the barriers, and the bungee platform still swayed slightly from residual momentum. It looked like a battlefield. The human had called it a relaxing Tuesday. Calveth began drafting her preliminary report, knowing that the academic community would struggle to accept the implications of their findings. Humans didn't just survive on a death world, they had turned survival itself into entertainment. They sought out mortal danger for pleasure. They considered near-death experiences to be stress relief. And what they had demonstrated was apparently the gentle introduction to their recreational activities. The universe, Calveth realized, was a far more terrifying place than anyone had previously understood. Somewhere in the depths of space, an entire planet of beings was turning physics-defying survival into weekend hobbies, transforming lethality into leisure, and calling it fun. She made a mental note to request immediate transfer to a research project involving something safe and predictable. Perhaps the study of stellar formation, or the behavioral patterns of quantum phenomena. Anything that didn't involve watching death-world predators explain why nearly dying made them happy.